Princess Verlith Canthara had never felt such anger in her entire life. She stood in the great hall of her father's palace, her silver skin glowing with frustration. Her violet eyes burned as she looked down at the creature kneeling before the throne. A human. A simple, ordinary human male with no special powers, no armor on his skin, and no ability to control the elements. He was nothing. His name was Daniel Carter. He came from a small planet called Earth, a world that most of the galaxy considered primitive and unimportant. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and a calm expression on his face that made Velith even more angry. How dare he look so peaceful when he was about to ruin her life? The Great Hall was filled with the most powerful beings in the Celestine Empire. Nobles with skin of silver and gold watched the scene with curiosity and amusement. Velith's 4 older brothers stood near the throne, laughing openly at her misfortune. Her mother, Empress Cyrilith, sat beside the Emperor with a look of disgust on her beautiful face. Among the Celestine people, strength was everything. Every Celestine could connect to the cosmic energy that flowed through the universe. They could move objects with their minds, create fire from nothing, and live for thousands of years. Humans could do none of these things. They were considered the weakest intelligent species in the known galaxy. And now Velith was expected to marry one. "Father, this cannot be serious," Velith said, her voice sharp like broken glass. "You expect me to bond with this creature? He has no power. He has no standing. He is nothing more than a soft-skinned animal from a forgotten world." Emperor Canthara sat on his throne of crystal and starlight. His face showed no emotion as he looked at his daughter. He was over 3,000 years old, and he had learned long ago to hide his feelings behind a mask of calm authority. "The treaty is absolute, daughter," the Emperor said. "It cannot be broken. 1,000 years ago, the humans helped save our bloodline during the Shadow Wars. We made a promise to them, sealed in blood and cosmic law. When they call upon us, we must answer. When we call upon them, they must answer. This human has been chosen to fulfill that ancient debt. But why must I be the one to pay it?" Velith demanded. "Because you are of age, and you are unbonded. The treaty requires a royal union. Your brothers are already mated. You are the only choice." Velith wanted to scream. She wanted to use her powers to tear the hall apart stone by stone. But she was a princess, and princesses did not throw tantrums in public. Instead, she clenched her fists and felt her nails dig into her palms. Daniel Carter rose to his feet. He was tall for a human, but still shorter than most Celestine males. He wore simple clothes, nothing fancy or impressive. But when he looked at Velith, he did not look away. He met her glowing violet eyes with his ordinary brown ones, and he did not flinch. "I did not ask for this either, Your Highness," Daniel said. His voice was calm and steady. "The leaders of my planet chose me for this duty. I was a cargo pilot, nobody special. I have no family, no connections, no importance. I think they picked me because they would not miss me if things went wrong." Something in his words made Velith pause. There was no self-pity in his voice, just simple honesty. He was stating facts, not complaining about them. "But I have never broken a promise in my life," Daniel continued. "And I do not plan to start now. If this treaty says I must be here, then I will be here. I will do my duty. I only ask that you give me a chance to prove that I am not the burden you think I am." Prince Kalen, the eldest of Velith's brothers, stepped forward with a cruel smile on his face. "A chance? What chance could a human possibly have among us? You cannot touch the cosmic energy. You cannot defend yourself against even the weakest of our warriors. You will be dead within a month, killed by someone who finds your presence offensive." Daniel turned to look at the prince. "Then I will have to be careful? Careful?" Kalen laughed. You will need more than caution, little human. You will need a miracle. Maybe I will find one." The answer was so simple, so unafraid, that it silenced the prince for a moment. Callan's eyes narrowed with suspicion and dislike, but he said nothing more. Emperor Kinthura raised his hand to signal the end of the discussion. The bonding ceremony will take place at the next lunar cycle. Until then, the human will be given quarters in the East Wing. He will be treated as a guest of the Empire, though not as a member of the royal family. Not yet. Valith noticed the words, "not yet," and felt her stomach turn with disgust. The idea that this human could ever be considered her equal was impossible to accept. As the court began to leave the Great Hall, Valith took one last look at Daniel Carter. He stood alone in the middle of the vast room, surrounded by beings who could kill him with a thought. Any other creature would be trembling with fear. But Daniel simply looked around the hall with quiet curiosity, as if he was studying the architecture rather than worrying about his survival. What kind of creature showed no fear in the face of certain danger? Was he stupid? Was he brave? Or was there something else hidden behind those ordinary brown eyes? Valith pushed the thought away. It did not matter what he was. He was a human, and humans were weak. That was a fact known throughout the galaxy. No amount of calm behavior could change biology. She turned and walked out of the hall without looking back. Daniel watched her go. He could feel the hatred coming from her, and he understood it. She was a princess, destined to marry someone powerful and important. Instead, she was stuck with him, a nobody from a planet that most species considered a cosmic joke. But Daniel had learned something important during his years as a cargo pilot, traveling between distant stars. He had learned that the galaxy was full of surprises. Things that seemed weak could be strong. Things that seemed simple could be complex. And things that seemed impossible could become real. As he stood alone in the Great Hall, Daniel felt something strange deep inside his chest. It was like a door opening in a room he did not know existed. Behind that door was something vast and powerful, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. He did not understand what it was. Not yet. But he knew, somehow, that his time among the Celestins would change everything. Not just for him. For everyone. 3 weeks passed since Daniel Carter arrived at the Celestin Palace. During that time, he learned many things about his new home. He learned that the palace was larger than most cities on Earth. He learned that the Celestin people ate food made of pure energy and light. He learned that they considered sleep a weakness, something only lower species needed. He also learned that almost everyone in the palace wanted him dead. No one attacked him directly. The Emperor's command protected him from open violence. But Daniel could feel the hatred wherever he went. Servants refused to bring him food. Guards turned their backs when he passed. Nobles whispered insults just loud enough for him to hear. Daniel ignored all of it. He had faced worse during his years as a cargo pilot. He had been robbed, beaten, and left for dead on distant moons. A few whispers and cold looks were nothing compared to that. Instead of hiding in his quarters, Daniel spent his days exploring the palace and learning everything he could. He visited the training grounds where Celestin warriors practiced their combat skills. He studied their movements, their techniques, their strategies. He could not match their superhuman speed or strength, but he could learn how they thought and how they fought. Princess Valith watched him from a distance. She told herself it was her duty to monitor the human who would soon be her mate. She told herself she was looking for weaknesses, for proof that he was as pathetic as she believed. But deep inside, she was curious. She watched Daniel train with the palace guards. The guards were young warriors eager to humiliate the human in front of anyone watching. They attacked him with their wooden practice swords, moving faster than any human eye should be able to follow. But Daniel followed. He blocked the first strike, dodged the second, and countered with a move that sent the guard stumbling backward. The guard attacked again, angrier now, using more of his superhuman speed. Daniel adapted, changed his stance, and blocked again. He lost the fight, of course. The guard was simply too fast and too strong. But Daniel lasted longer than anyone expected. And when he fell, he got back up and asked to continue. "Your human is strange," Prince Kalen said, appearing beside Valeth on the balcony overlooking the training grounds. "He should be broken by now. He should be hiding in his room, crying for his home world. Instead, he persists." "He's not my human," Valeth replied, but her eyes never left Daniel as he prepared to face the guard again. "He will be soon. Have you accepted that yet?" Valeth did not answer. She did not want to accept it, but she was beginning to wonder if she had misjudged the situation. Not Daniel's power, of course. He was still weak by any standard that mattered. But his spirit, his determination, his refusal to give up. Those things were not what she had expected from a human. Something strange was happening to Daniel during those weeks, though he told no one about it. Objects had started moving when he reached for them. Not in the way Celestins moved things, with their minds and their cosmic energy. This was different. When Daniel wanted a cup of water, the cup would slide across the table toward his hand before he touched it. When he wished a door would open, it opened. At first, Daniel thought he was imagining things. Then, he thought he was going crazy. Finally, he accepted that something was changing inside him. Something he did not understand. The strange power inside him grew stronger every day, like a fire slowly spreading through dry wood. The first real test came during a diplomatic reception. Representatives from the Vorthan Dominion arrived at the palace to discuss border disputes with the Celestin Empire. The Vorthans were ancient enemies of the Celestins, a species of massive reptilian warriors who valued strength above all else. Their leader was High Commander Julkith, a mountain of scaled muscle and dark power. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with eyes like pools of black oil and claws that could tear through steel. He was famous throughout the galaxy for his cruelty and his psychic abilities that could crush minds like insects. The reception was held in the grand ballroom. Hundreds of nobles from both empires gathered to witness the negotiations. Daniel stood near Princess Valeth, as protocol required. He wore simple formal clothes, nothing compared to the elaborate robes of the Celestin nobility. Julkith noticed him immediately. The High Commander crossed the ballroom floor, each step making the ground tremble slightly. He stopped in front of Daniel and looked down at him with obvious disgust. "This is the mate of Celestin royalty?" Julkith's voice was like stones grinding together. "A human? Perhaps your empire has grown as weak as the rumors suggest, Princess. To match their bloodline with such a pathetic creature." Valeth opened her mouth to respond, but Julkith was not finished. He wanted to make a point, to show everyone in the room that humans were nothing but insects to be crushed. The High Commander extended a tendril of psychic force toward Daniel. It was a simple attack, barely a fraction of his true power. It was meant to drive the human to his knees, to make him scream and beg for mercy in front of the entire court. The dark energy struck Daniel like a wave of cold hatred. And it stopped. Not deflected. Not absorbed. It simply ceased to exist the moment it touched Daniel's body, as if it had never been real at all. The entire ballroom fell silent. Julkith's confident expression cracked for the first time in centuries. He stared at Daniel with something that might have been confusion or fear or both. Daniel looked up at the massive Vorthan commander with those calm brown eyes. "I believe you were discussing border disputes, High Commander. Please, continue." No one moved. No one spoke. The most powerful psychic warrior in the Vorthan Dominion had just been rendered completely ineffective by a human. a species that was supposed to have no power at all. Zhilkith took a step backward. He tried to hide his reaction, but everyone had seen it. The High Commander of the Vorthan Dominion had retreated from a human. The negotiations continued, but no one was thinking about borders anymore. They were all thinking about what they had just witnessed. That night, Princess Valith came to Daniel's quarters for the first time. She stood in his doorway, her silver skin pale in the moonlight, her violet eyes full of questions she did not know how to ask. "What are you?" she finally said. Daniel was sitting by the window, looking out at the 3 moons that hung in the Celestin sky. He turned to face her, and for a moment, she thought she saw something ancient and vast looking back at her through his ordinary brown eyes. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I think I am starting to find out." Behind him, his shadow flickered on the wall, even though he was perfectly still. And for just a moment, that shadow seemed to have wings. Valith felt fear for the first time in her life. Not fear of Daniel, fear of what he might become. And underneath that fear, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The Forbidden's archive existed beneath the Celestin Palace, buried deep in rock that was older than the Empire itself. Only the high priests were allowed to enter. The knowledge stored there was considered too dangerous for ordinary minds, too powerful for those who might misuse it. Princess Valith had never broken the rules before. She was royalty, destined to uphold the laws of her people, not destroy them. But after what she had witnessed in the ballroom, she needed answers. She needed to understand what Daniel Carter truly was. She waited until the deep hours of night when even the guards grew tired. She used her royal authority to pass through the outer gates, and she used her powers to slip past the inner defenses. When she finally stood in the vast underground chamber filled with ancient texts and forgotten knowledge, she felt like she had stepped into another world. The texts were written in languages older than the Celestin Empire. Some were carved in stone. Some were burned into metal. Some seemed to float in the air, made of pure light that never faded. Valith searched through them for hours, looking for anything related to humanity. What she found made her blood run cold. The oldest text spoke of a time before the Celestin Empire, before the Vorthan Dominion, before any of the current powers of the galaxy existed. In those ancient days, there was only one species that ruled the stars: humans. But they were not the weak creatures the galaxy knew today. They were beings of impossible power, capable of reshaping reality with a thought. They could create stars and destroy them. They could travel between dimensions. They could bend time itself to their will. They had fought wars against the primordial gods, the ancient beings who had created the universe, and they had nearly won. The conflict had lasted for eons. Entire galaxies had been destroyed in the fighting. Reality itself had begun to crack under the strain of such immense power clashing against itself. In the end, a truce was reached. The humans agreed to be sealed, their cosmic potential locked away forever in exchange for the survival of the universe. The Celestins, the Vorthans, and every other elder species had risen to power only because humanity had stepped aside. The debt the Emperor spoke of was not gratitude for military aid during some forgotten war. It was a binding oath of eternal servitude, made when humanity had shown mercy instead of complete destruction. Valith dropped the ancient text she was holding. Her hands were shaking. Everything she had been taught about the galaxy, about the natural order of species, about human weakness, was a lie. Or rather, it was only half the truth. Humans were not weak. They were sleeping. And Daniel Carter was beginning to wake up. She ran back to the palace as fast as her powers would carry her. She needed to find Daniel. She needed to warn him, or stop him, or something. She did not know what she would do when she reached him. She only knew that everything had changed. When she arrived at Daniel's quarters, she found chaos. Her 4 brothers had decided to teach Daniel a lesson. Prince Kalen had gathered his siblings and cornered the human in his room. They had planned to beat him severely, to show him his place, to remind him that no matter what had happened in the ballroom, he was still nothing but a weak human who existed only because of their father's protection. But something had gone wrong. Daniel stood in the center of the room, completely untouched. His eyes were glowing with a soft golden light that had never been there before. Around him, Velith's 4 brothers were frozen in place, suspended in time itself. Their eyes moved with terror, but their bodies could not. They were trapped between one heartbeat and the next, prisoners in their own flesh. I asked them to stop, Daniel said quietly when he saw Velith in the doorway. He looked at his own hands with a mixture of wonder and horror. I did not want to fight them. I just wanted them to stop. And they did. Velith could not speak. She had just read about the ancient power of humanity, and now she was watching it manifest before her eyes. The ability to command time, to speak words that reality could not disobey. These were powers that even the primordial gods used carefully. Daniel, she finally managed to say, "Do you know what you are?" "No." He shook his head slowly. "I feel something inside me, something that has been locked away for a very long time. It is like a door that has been sealed shut for thousands of years, and now it is opening. I cannot stop it. I am not sure I want to stop it. You need to release my brothers." Daniel looked at the frozen princes. His expression was sad, not angry. "They wanted to hurt me. They have wanted to hurt me since I arrived. But I do not want to hurt them. I never wanted to hurt anyone." He raised his hand, and time began to flow again. The 4 princes stumbled and fell, gasping for air as if they had been drowning. When they saw Daniel standing over them with those glowing golden eyes, they scrambled backward like frightened children. "Go," Daniel said softly. "I will not harm you. But do not come for me again." The princes fled without a word. Kalen, the eldest and proudest of them, did not even look back as he ran. When they were gone, Daniel's eyes returned to their normal brown color. He sat down heavily on his bed, looking exhausted and confused. "I do not understand what is happening to me," he admitted. Velith stood in the doorway for a long moment. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far away from this creature as possible. He was dangerous beyond anything she had imagined. If his power continued to grow, there might be nothing in the universe that could stop him. But instead of running, she stepped inside the room and closed the door behind her. "I found something in the Forbidden's archive," she said. "I know what you are. I know what humans used to be." She told him everything. The ancient war against the gods. The seal that had locked away humanity's power. The truth behind the treaty that had brought him to the Celestine Palace. Daniel listened in silence, his face showing emotions that Velith could not read. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. "So my people were monsters," Daniel finally said. "We nearly destroyed everything." "You were powerful," Velith corrected him. "Power is not the same as evil. But we used our power for war. We used it for destruction. And then you chose to stop. You chose to give up everything to save the universe. That is not what monsters do." Daniel looked at her with those ordinary brown eyes that now seemed to contain something infinite and ancient. "You are not afraid of me?" Velith considered the question honestly. "I am terrified of you," she admitted. "But I am also beginning to understand you. You have had every reason to hate my people. We have treated you like an animal since you arrived. Yet you have shown nothing but patience and kindness. Even tonight, when my brothers attacked you, you chose mercy instead of revenge." She sat down beside him on the bed, close enough to touch but not quite touching. "You could destroy everything," she whispered. "You could tear this palace apart. You could crush my brothers like insects, You could make the entire Celestin Empire kneel before you." "I know," Daniel replied. "But you will not. No, I will not." Valeth looked into his eyes and saw something that she had never expected to find in a human. She saw strength that came from choosing restraint. She saw power that was tempered by compassion. She saw a being who could reshape the universe, but chose instead to simply be kind. "Then perhaps," she said slowly, "I have misjudged you from the beginning." They sat together until dawn, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since his arrival, Daniel did not feel alone. And for the first time in her life, Valith understood that true strength had nothing to do with power. It had everything to do with choice. Word spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The human made of Princess Valith had done impossible things. He had stopped the psychic attack of High Commander Julkith. He had frozen the princes of the Celestin Empire in time itself. He had begun displaying powers that had not been seen since the beginning of recorded history. The elder races grew afraid. Messengers traveled between distant stars, carrying warnings and rumors. Emergency councils were held on 100 different worlds. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years suddenly found themselves united by a common fear. The humans were waking up. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had enjoyed peace because humanity slept. The seal had held. The ancient power had remained locked away. But now something had changed. One human had begun to remember what his species truly was. And if one could remember, others might follow. When the elder races feared something they could not defeat, they did the only thing they could do. They called upon beings older than themselves. They called upon the primordial gods. 3 of them answered the call. Eternal Zenrath, the weaver of fates, who could see every possible future spreading out like threads of light. Morval, the keeper of death, whose touch could end any life in the universe. And Thalkira, the mother of stars, who had given birth to the galaxies themselves in the first moments of creation. They descended upon the Celestin homeworld on a morning that should have been peaceful and ordinary. The sky turned dark as their presence blocked out the sun. Reality rippled and bent around them like water disturbed by stones. Their power was so vast that simply being near them could drive lesser beings insane. The entire palace shook as they landed in the great courtyard. Walls cracked. Windows shattered. Servants screamed and ran in every direction. Emperor Kinthara prostrated himself immediately, pressing his face against the cold stone floor. The entire court followed his example. Nobles who had lived for thousands of years and commanded armies fell to their knees like frightened children. Nobles who had lived for thousands of years and commanded armies fell to their knees like frightened children. Even Valith, proud as she was, bent her knee before the cosmic entities that had shaped existence itself. Only Daniel remained standing. He had felt them coming before they arrived. The power inside him had recognized its ancient enemies, and it had surged to the surface like a wave responding to the moon. His eyes glowed with golden light that matched the radiance of distant suns. His shadow stretched behind him in ways that defied the laws of physics, sometimes showing wings, sometimes showing forms that no human body should contain. The 3 primordial gods stood before him in shapes that mortal minds could barely comprehend. Eternal Zenrath appeared as a figure wrapped in threads of light, each thread a different possible future. Morval was darkness given form, an absence of everything that somehow still had presence and will. Thalkira shifted constantly between a woman of impossible beauty and a spiral of burning stars. "You dare?" Morval's voice was the sound of endings, of final breaths and forgotten names. It echoed through dimensions that most beings could not perceive. A human stands before gods? Daniel felt the weight of that voice pressing against him, trying to force him down. 10,000 years ago, it might have worked. But the seal was breaking, and with each passing moment, Daniel felt more of his true heritage flowing through his veins. "I am not standing before you," Daniel replied. His voice had changed. It carried harmonics that made the air itself vibrate, frequencies that resonated with the fundamental forces of creation. "I am standing among you. There is a difference." The three primordial gods exchanged glances that contained eons of unspoken communication. They had expected to find a threat. They had expected to find another warrior like those who had challenged them in the ancient war. Instead, they found something unexpected. "The seal weakens," Thalkira observed. Her voice was warmer than her companions, but no less powerful. "We felt it across the cosmos, like a wound opening in the fabric of reality. We came to assess whether you would be a threat to everything we have built since the war." "And what have you assessed?" Daniel asked. Eternal Zenra spoke, his eyes containing every possible future that could ever exist. "We have looked into the threads of fate, human. We have seen what you might become. You could grow more powerful than any of us. You could tear the seal away completely and unleash humanity's full potential across the galaxy. You could reignite the war that nearly destroyed everything." "Good," Daniel repeated. "But will I?" The Weaver of Fates paused, and something that might have been surprise flickered across his otherworldly features. "That is the question, is it not? In all the futures I can see, the answer depends on one thing only: choice. Your choice." Daniel felt the full weight of his awakening power now. He could sense stars being born millions of light years away. He could feel the pulse of dark matter flowing between galaxies. He could perceive dimensions that existed parallel to this one, separated by barriers thinner than thought. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that he could unmake the three beings standing before him if he wished. He could end the primordial gods. He could rewrite the laws of physics. He could erase the seal completely and restore humanity to their rightful place as masters of creation. The power was there, burning inside him like an infinite flame, begging to be used. Instead, he let it settle back into stillness. "I did not ask for this power," Daniel said, and his voice was calm again, human again. "I was a cargo pilot. I fixed ships and delivered supplies to colonies no one cared about. I was nobody. Then I was brought here against my will, treated like an animal, and told that I had to marry a woman who hated me." He looked around the courtyard at all the beings kneeling before the gods. He saw Emperor Canthara, face pressed against stone. He saw the princes who had tried to beat him. He saw nobles who had whispered insults and servants who had refused him food. And he saw Valeth, kneeling like all the others, watching him with eyes full of fear and hope. "I could take revenge," Daniel continued. "I could make everyone who hurt me suffer. I could make the Celestin Empire bow before me as their new ruler. I could challenge you three and see who would survive." He paused and shook his head slowly. "But that is not who I am. That is not who I want to be. I did not become powerful because I sought power. It was given to me by accident of birth, by some ancient heritage I never knew existed. Using it to dominate or destroy would make me exactly the kind of monster that your war was supposed to prevent." Morval, the Keeper of Death, stared at Daniel with eyes that held the void between stars. "And what do you want, human? If not conquest, if not revenge, what would you do with power that rivals our own?" "I want to live my life," Daniel said simply. "I want to honor my commitments. I want to treat people with kindness and maybe do some good along the way. That is all. That is enough." The three primordial gods looked at each other once more. In their long existence, they had faced warriors and conquerors, tyrants and destroyers. They had never faced someone who simply wanted to be decent. Eternal Genrath was the first to move. The Weaver of Fates lowered his head, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of something he had never expected to see. Morval followed, the Keeper of Death bowing to a mortal for the first time since the universe began. Thalkira, the Mother of Stars, smiled as she bent her head. Then perhaps, she said, humanity's return will not be the catastrophe we feared. Perhaps the universe has been waiting for someone like you. One by one, every being in the courtyard realized what was happening. The primordial gods, the oldest and most powerful entities in existence, were kneeling before the human who had chosen kindness over conquest. Emperor Kinthara raised his head from the stone and stared in disbelief. The princes who had tried to beat Daniel looked at each other with something that might have been shame. Nobles and servants and warriors from a dozen different species watched as the impossible unfolded before them. Valith felt tears streaming down her silver cheeks. She had called Daniel weak. She had resented him. She had wished he would simply disappear and let her live her proper life. And he had proven himself greater than gods, not through force, but through the simple choice to remain who he truly was. Daniel Carter, cargo pilot from Earth, nobody special, stood in the courtyard of the Celestine Palace while gods and emperors knelt before him. And he felt nothing but the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made the right choice. 1 year had passed since Daniel Carter arrived at the Celestine Palace as an unwanted burden. 1 year since Princess Velith had looked at him with disgust and demanded to know why she had to suffer such a pathetic mate. 1 year since a simple human cargo pilot had begun to wake up to powers that even the gods had learned to fear. Everything had changed. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for the morning of the summer solstice, when all 3 moons would align in the Celestine sky. It was no longer the reluctant political obligation it had once been. Invitations had been sent to every corner of the known galaxy. Representatives from thousands of species traveled across impossible distances to witness the union. It was being called the most important event in galactic history. Daniel stood in his chambers, looking at himself in a mirror made of polished starlight. He wore the formal robes of a Celestine royal, modified to fit his human body. The fabric shimmered with colors that had no names in any human language. Around his neck hung a simple chain with a small crystal pendant that Valith had given him 3 months ago, a symbol of her acceptance and her love. He still looked like himself. Brown hair, brown eyes, average height for a human. But there was something different in the way he carried himself now. A quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. A knock came at the door, and Daniel smiled as he felt the familiar presence on the other side. "Come in, Valith." The princes entered, and Daniel's breath caught in his chest as it always did when he saw her. She wore the traditional silver gown of Celestine brides, a flowing dress made of liquid moonlight that seemed to move on its own. Her silver skin glowed with an inner radiance, and her violet eyes sparkled with a joy that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. "You look beautiful," Daniel said. "You look acceptable," Valith replied. But she was smiling, and she crossed the room to wrap her arms around him. "I am nervous. The most powerful princess in the galaxy is nervous about a ceremony? I am nervous about everything changing. After today, nothing will be the same. We will be bonded. We will be partners in everything. And the galaxy will look to us to lead them into whatever comes next." Daniel held her close and felt the beating of her heart against his chest. The galaxy can look wherever it wants. My job is to stand beside you and support you in everything you do. Your job is to do the same for me. Everything else is just details. Valith laughed, and the sound was like crystal bells ringing in a summer breeze. "You make it sound so simple." It is simple. People make things complicated because they are afraid. We do not need to be afraid anymore. She pulled back and looked at him with those violet eyes that had once held nothing but contempt for his existence. I was so wrong about you. I spent my whole life believing the power was everything, that strength was measured by how much damage you could do. You showed me that true strength comes from choosing what kind of person you want to be, no matter what power you have. You taught me things too, Daniel said. You showed me that it is possible to change, to grow beyond the prejudices you were raised with. When you came to me that night after my confrontation with your brothers, you could have run away. You could have reported me to your father and demanded that I be executed as a threat. Instead, you listened. You learned. You chose to see me as a person instead of a monster. You are not a monster. Neither are you. Neither are your people. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. A servant appeared at the door to announce that the ceremony was about to begin. Daniel and Valith shared one last quiet moment together before stepping out into the corridor that would lead them to their future. The grand temple was filled beyond capacity. Celestian nobles in their finest robes sat alongside Vorthan warriors in their ceremonial armor. Representatives from the insectoid Crix collective stood beside the ethereal beings of the Whisper Realm. Even the three primordial gods were present. Their vast forms contained into shapes that would not destroy the minds of those around them. Emperor King Thara stood at the altar, ready to officiate the ceremony as tradition required. His face no longer held the cold distance it once had. Over the past year, he had come to genuinely respect Daniel, to see him not as a necessary burden, but as a worthy addition to the royal family. Empress Cyrillith sat in the front row, her expression complex. She had been the hardest to convince, the slowest to accept. But even she could not deny the change in her daughter's happiness. The light in Velith's eyes that had never been there before. The four princes sat nearby, no longer laughing or making cruel jokes. They had learned their lesson on that night when Daniel had frozen them in time. More than that, they had watched their sister transform from a resentful prisoner of duty into a radiant woman in love. They did not fully understand what Daniel was, but they understood that he made Valith happy. For now, that was enough. Daniel and Valith walked down the aisle together, hand in hand. The crowd rose to their feet as the couple passed. Some bowed their heads in respect. Others simply watched in wonder at the sight of a human walking as an equal among the most powerful beings in the galaxy. When they reached the altar, Emperor Kainthara raised his hands for silence. The temple fell quiet, thousands of beings holding their breath. We gather here today to witness the bonding of two souls across the boundaries of species and expectation, the Emperor began. 1 year ago, I called upon the ancient treaty to bring a human to our world. I believed I was claiming a servant, fulfilling an obligation, nothing more. Instead, I received a lesson in humility that I will carry for the rest of my existence. He turned to Daniel with something like pride in his ancient eyes. You came to us as a stranger, treated as less than nothing by nearly everyone in this palace. You faced ridicule, isolation, and violence. Yet you never responded with anger or vengeance. You never used your growing power to force respect. Instead, you earned it through patience, kindness, and an integrity that put all of us to shame. The Emperor then looked at his daughter. Valith, you were the most resistant to this union. You made no secret of your feelings. But you also had the courage to change, to admit when you were wrong, to open your heart to possibilities you had never considered. That kind of growth is rare, even among our long-lived people. He reached out and placed one hand on Daniel's shoulder and one on Valith's. The bond you share is not just between two individuals. It is a bridge between two peoples, a promise of what the future might hold. Humanity is awakening across the galaxy. Other humans are beginning to feel the stirrings of their ancient heritage. They will need guidance, examples of how to use power responsibly, how to choose wisdom over domination. You too will be those examples. Not through conquest or command, but through the simple act of living well and treating others with respect. The bonding ritual proceeded. Daniel and Velith exchanged vows that transcended language, words that echoed not just in the temple, but across dimensions that most beings could not perceive. Their souls touched and intertwined, creating a connection that would last beyond death, beyond time itself. When the ceremony ended, Daniel Carter and Princess Velith Kaintharo were no longer two separate people. They were bonded partners, equals in every way that mattered, united in purpose and love. The crowd erupted in celebration. Music filled the temple, strange melodies that combined Celestine harmonics with rhythms Daniel recognized from Earth. Beings who had been enemies for millennia shared drinks and laughter. For one perfect moment, the galaxy was at peace. In the years that followed, Daniel and Velith worked together to reshape the cosmic order. They traveled to distant worlds, helping newly awakened humans understand their heritage without losing themselves to the intoxication of power. They mediated disputes between ancient species who had forgotten how to speak without threatening war. They created institutions dedicated to the welfare of all beings, regardless of their strength or origin. Humanity spread across the stars once more, but not as conquerors. They became healers, teachers, builders. The ancient power that had once nearly destroyed the universe was channeled into creation instead of destruction. Planets that had been dead for millions of years bloomed with new life. Technologies that had been lost were rediscovered and shared freely. The primordial gods watched from their distant realms, and for the first time in eons, they felt hope instead of fear. The universe was changing, growing into something new and beautiful. And at the center of that change were a human cargo pilot, an alien princess, who had learned to love each other. Daniel Carter never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the loneliness of being an orphan, the hardship of working on cargo ships for barely enough pay to survive, the feeling of being nobody special in a galaxy full of wonders. Those memories kept him humble, reminded him why kindness mattered, why every person deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their power or status. Velith never forgot her transformation. She spoke openly about how wrong she had been, how prejudice had blinded her to the truth standing right in front of her. Her honesty inspired others to examine their own assumptions, to question the beliefs they had inherited without thought.